just wanted to thank everyone for being here this morning and for being a part of this great event. My name is Helen Wolf, and I am the Senior Director of Development and Stewardship here at Coastal Community Foundation. And we are just so excited to be able to bring families and advisors together to talk about multi-generational philanthropy. As you can imagine, getting multiple generations to align on any kind of giving strategy that reflects the diverse interests and personalities can be really complex. And so we've been really glad to be doing this work with families really since our inception in 1974. And we've been excited to add some additional programming and services for families and advisors who better want to do this thing called family philanthropy and learn from their peers. So this is our third forum that we have hosted, and we're just so glad to have each of you with us today. We'll go ahead and get started with session 1, which is going to be a really wonderful panel discussion about forging meaningful and collaborative relationships with professional advisors. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen so you can see our wonderful faces. And I'll go ahead and welcome the panel. Thank you all for joining us. And to start, could each of you, I'll start with Tripp, give a short introduction about who you are and what your role in family philanthropy looks like.
Yeah, my name is Tripp Wiles, and I started the firm 15 years ago to help families plan for their family, protect their assets, and preserve their legacies. I sit down with families every day, helping them decide how they want to transition their wealth, how they want to use their wealth to help their families and others, and again, preserve their legacy. I came to law school late. I went to the Citadel and went in the Army for a few years and worked for the government. So when I came into law, I kind of knew what I wanted to do. So I spent very little time in the courtroom. Most of it is actually in this room, just talking about what families want, what their concerns are. And that's usually the foundation of planning is the people that they care about and want to give to. So that's what we help folks do.
Thanks so much, Tripp. Terry, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Terry Collins Murray, and I'm a financial advisor with Morgan Stanley here in the Charleston office. And we serve high net worth families, and I personally and our team personally has a real passion for educating families so that future generations can be good stewards of family wealth. Our practice is centered on financial planning as the foundation, and we really take heart to each person's individual goals at the individual and at the family level to really understand the unique and kind of ever-changing landscape for that particular family. And I've personally experienced a lot of things in my lifetime that really drives me every day to really help families, especially at that second and third generational level, so that you can maintain oftentimes the wealth that has been created by, let's say, the matriarch and the patriarch. So we're proud and honored every day to help the families that we serve. And we certainly love connecting with CPAs and attorneys because we can't practice tax and legal advice. And that piece is so helpful in looking at the big picture to connect all the dots. And then, of course, tag in with the philanthropic side of the equation. Thanks for having me.
Ray, can you introduce yourself?
Good morning. My name is Ray Smith. I'm a certified public accountant. I've been I have my own practice for over 30 years. I primarily serve individuals and small businesses. I kind of look at myself as a country doctor in that I have to know a little bit about a lot of things. And because of that, we often sometimes start conversations with clients about estate planning, what do you want to do, that kind of thing. And if there's an interest, then generally I will refer them to a specialist such as Tripp or Terry.
Excellent. I'll go in the same order again. Can you kind of describe what services you provide and what you don't provide within your specialty? I'll start with you, Tripp.
Yeah, so we do trust planning primarily. We do will planning if someone wants to. We're big believers in trust planning on the estate side, which includes tax planning, charitable planning, We do probate and trust administration. And then we also major on asset protection opportunities for clients to protect their wealth. If there's an area within that someone else we think does a better job, then we're going to co-counsel with someone that does that, because of course we can't do everything. And there are, especially when you get into the charitable planning and tax planning, there are a lot of unique opportunities where there's some people that are specialists in just one area, and we want to access them. What we don't do is litigation in our law firm. We don't, again, we're very, very rarely in the courtroom.
What about you, Terry?
Great. And what we provide is wealth management services, and I can touch on a little bit more of that in just a minute. And like I mentioned earlier, what we cannot provide is tax advice and legal advice. And I say that I am an attorney by education, and my undergrad was in accounting. So I know enough a little bit about each of these areas, but we cannot practice in those areas. So it's important that we identify some of the issues and educate our clients, and then bring in the respective resources like a TRIP or a RAY for those particular pieces. When we talk about wealth management, what exactly does that mean? I think a lot of people immediately think, oh, well, that means investing. Yes, of course, it does mean investing, but we really think to invest is important, but it's sort of like driving a car without GPS. You know, you kind of need to know where you're going. And oftentimes it might take your investing path might take a different course, again, based on your goals and objectives. So it starts with financial planning, then that helps inform investment decisions, but it also touches on risk analysis. You know, what are the gaps? What are you missing? Could it be long-term care kind of situations, disability? You know, a lot goes into the equation. And then finally, the legacy planning component, not just what's happening during your lifetime, but let's talk about what are your goals for beyond, you know, your span of life. And that's really where the estate planning component can come in, and the tax piece can come in with CPAs. Let's save more of what you make so that you can retain that for your family today and your family tomorrow.
What about you, Ray?
My role is more or less limited to just preparing the tax returns and maybe crunching the numbers on some of these alternatives and providing some input to my clients, and also input to the other professional advisors. Many of my clients I've had for 25 and 30 years. And so I'm well familiar with the family and all the dynamics that are associated with that. So, you know, I may not be out as front as Terry or Trip, but I'm kind of lurking in the background.
It's a very important background. And you mentioned something really important, Ray. All of our businesses, Coastal Community Foundation included, is a relationship-driven business. And we've been working with families, just like you said, Ray, for 20, 30 years. When is it appropriate for each of you, or when do you prefer to bring in additional family members in the conversation? Terry, you mentioned kind of G2 and G3. Maybe you can start this question about when you prefer to bring those additional members into your conversations.
Sure. We really look to the main client, which would be the matriarch and patriarch, let's say, and we ask for their thoughts. We tell them the importance of having those critical conversations and the statistics around how wealth can be eroded, and you see the numbers easily is eroded at that second generational, third generational level. So we talk to them about the importance of beginning to share what it took for those families to get to the point where they are today, and how would they like to share that with their respective, you know, G2s and G3s, and how can we facilitate on that front. And oftentimes, you know, once we say that we can help with those critical conversations, because money is a topic sometimes that's taboo, and families, you know, often shy away from it. People don't, it's not their first favorite thing to talk about in terms of, you know, sitting around the dining room table. So once we get their approval, or they're okay to go forward, then oftentimes what it means is we'll start with the financial plan tailored around that matriarch and patriarch, and we'll walk together with the main set of clients. We'll walk the children through what that plan looks like. And then we'll have the families weigh in on why that's important to them and why staying on track with that plan is important to them, and their vision for what they would like for their, respective future generations to do, what that legacy goal really means. And, at that point in time, often it just depends on the level of wealth, but oftentimes we'll have some family visitations where we'll have an offsite seminar, if you will, develop mission statements and bring in lots of respective resources, such as the setting here, to really kind of talk through the different aspects. And then ultimately the goal is to work on a financial plan for that second and third generation. So they have a roadmap as to how to connect, that first kind of master roadmap with their own respective roadmaps for their future now and going forward.
Tripp, what about you? When would you prefer, or when do you find it appropriate to bring additional family members into your conversations?
In most cases, it's going to be after the initial plan is done, the foundational plan, whether it's the will of trust. We're big encouragers. We call it a family meeting. We know the statistic is 100% of us are going to die. So, it's going to happen. It's not a if, but when. I try to explain to clients as a fire drill. Not only does it help when something happens, but also, I tell folks they did some very extensive studies in the 70s about how estate planning and tax planning and charitable planning actually work. And when it works, it was found is when there was education and open communication about the plan. So where I see the most problems is someone passes away or someone is making a large gift and the family is not aware of it. Then that's what can lead to conflict, lawsuits, disappointment, and just a bad day for everybody. So we really like to offer that as an option for clients early on. And Terry has a great point. You have some clients that just want to go over the structure of the plan and they don't really want the kids to know the actual dollar signs. And then we have some clients that go ahead and give us the go ahead to just be open about everything. But any communication is good in these instances because when something happens, people are more open to it. And I also find that, especially in the area of giving, it's an easy way to transfer that intent and have the family share in that intent before it actually happens.
Do you have anything to add, Ray?
Well, no, again, my role is more or less to spark the initial conversation, to start the ball rolling. And then, if there's an interest there, then we work with their existing advisor or recommended advisor, and then same with an attorney, whether they have one they use or whether they need someone who would be have the skills suited to do what they have to do to take that conversation further.
Now, this is kind of a jumping off point from that last discussion. We're having these great conversations with families. We're excited to bring in the next generation. We may reveal what the matriarch and patriarch has planned or what the structure, what the roadmap is. And then there's, a moment where there's a reckoning or a realization and things maybe shift course. What do you wish that your clients would tell you on the front end, as opposed to kind of cleaning up after the fact? What's something that folks can keep in mind when they're starting or having more initial conversations? And Tripp, I'll let you go first.
Well, in the simplest form, telling us exactly who all the players are. I've literally had times where we find out about people after the fact. So, but that's usually not the case. If there are going to be any issues, if there are people in the family that are not going to be happy with what their wishes are, that we need to have that conversation early on. Really exploring what they're trying to do. I tell the folks in my firm all the time, there's a lot that we think the client should do, but at the end of the day, that's not what matters. It's what drives the client. What are their concerns? What are their hopes and wishes? And making sure they understand what their options are to achieve that. And so there are a lot of ways to get to where people want to be. And sometimes it's simpler than they may even realize. But I find that having that conversation early on helps, because another thing I've noticed is sometimes even between husband and wives, they really haven't had these conversations, and they don't until they get in here. And so if they haven't had those conversations, they sure haven't told their children about those conversations. So having the conversations and then being purposeful about it. All of us have organizational challenges. None of us ever feel like we have it all together. But if you can take off some bite-sized chunks of, hey, this is how we want to plan, this is what we're trying to do, and they start talking about that with their family, I find there's a much better chance of success.
Absolutely. Ray, what about you? What do you wish that you knew on the front end as opposed to having to clean up or fix halfway through?
Well, if it's a client that I haven't had a long time, relatively new client, say, 4 or 5 years, I try and understand the family dynamic, the personalities of all the players that will be involved. And, it's kind of interesting. People sometimes open up to you and just talk. And it may not have anything to do with what you do, but it really gives you some valuable insights. And I think that's key, is to understand the lay of the land and see, what might be appropriate, what direction you might want to nudge them in.
Absolutely. I think we've all had those situations where you think you're asking one question and then all of a sudden get a 10-minute response about something else, but it is incredibly valuable and worth knowing. Terry, what about you? What do you wish you knew on the front end?
More about spending. And when we say goals, oftentimes that really translates into what are you spending? It can be spending in retirement is a goal, spending on charitable gifting during your lifetime, that's a goal. Legacy planning beyond your time on the time or planet of ours, that's a goal. It's when all of a sudden you have a financial plan and then someone goes and they spend money on something, second home, third home, family member that they decided to help out, as opposed to let's come back, take a look at your financial plan. We run what's called what if scenarios to help make informed decisions about the trade-offs. What if you do this? How much can you do and still, keep your financial plan intact? Those kinds of things would be great to know ahead of time. And then to Tripp's point, I think a lot of this has to do with is helping couples or family members have conversations before they even sit down with a financial advisor or an estate planning attorney or CPA. So they're really on the same page. And, I'll give you an example of that. Sometimes we'll find we sit down and say, okay, well, let's talk about what does retirement look like for you? So we can discuss, kind of living expenses, maybe a travel goal. And, this happened not too long ago. One person said, oh, the first thing I'm going to do when I retire is sit in my chair in the backyard and, stare at the pool and the beautiful view. And the other spouse said, really? Because I was envisioning traveling and doing all these great things. And the first party said, well, I've been traveling with work and that's what I've done my whole lifetime. So no, I want to stay put and be in one place. But that was important. That was a conversation that led to, okay, well, that's an important discussion to have. What does it look like? What are your, to make your dreams come true and have the lifestyle you envision? It means how are you allocating your funds toward various things, and that's spending. And let's talk about that on the front end.
Helen, may I add something?
Please do, Ray.
It's also important from my standpoint to have conversation coming back from the other advisors, because there have been some situations where there are some tax issues, maybe with some of the children, that may not come up in the conversation with the other advisors, but I would know about. For instance, I recall a situation years ago that an adult child needed a right substantial amount of money. His dad had some highly appreciated low basis stock. And this is something the estate planning attorney did not know. And I happened to come into the situation and I said, well, why don't you just have dad gift the stock to the son and let him sell it and take advantage of this big net operating loss he has. and it worked out. But that's something that, probably my client wouldn't have thought to say anything about. But, sometimes it's that little nugget that can make all the difference.
Absolutely. And that's what I think is so valuable about multidisciplinary teams like this, that each of you really hold an important key nugget that the other probably needs to know. And so having regular conversations can only benefit us. One of the other things I was thinking about what you said, Terry, is, how a difference in future can vary from spouse to spouse, and just the importance. Something that we say in our work is go slow to go fast. And so we take a lot of time to really understand what the true values are of this family. And then as long as we're laser focused on what the values are, we find that makes some of the future decisions easier because we have this ultimate clarity to fall back on. It's hard when families want to move quickly and get to the next step, but we really spend a lot of time on that values discussion so that we have the freedom to say no, or the freedom to make easier, faster answers in the future. And Trip, you brought up a really great point about having these conversations more regularly. You said that it's often not until the client is in your office that they think, oh gosh, we haven't talked about this yet. How often are you trying to meet with clients? How often should clients be revising or thinking through these discussions, and kind of what can they do in the interim between their regular meetings with you?
Yeah, so I would say of the three of us, clients probably meet and probably need to meet the least of times than with a CPA or financial advisor, depending on their wealth. So there are some of our clients who have a lot going on, and we do meet with at least annually. But for most people, at least every 3 years, they need to come in and talk about what are the tax updates, what are the changes in the law. We reach out to all of our clients every 3 years if we haven't heard from them. It's been my experience that most people aren't going to make changes to their plans, at least every 3 to 5 years. But updating is a big piece. Most Americans don't have estate planning. Those that do have old estate planning. And quite frankly, I'm in a pretty antiquated area of the law. So a lot of people who have planning, it's pretty outdated by the time they actually get it done. So it's something that should be looked at, especially if you want. I tell folks all the time, estate planning is about three things. And most of my clients have the first two when they come in the door, and that's love and money. What they're missing is control. If something happens to them, and we're not even talking about death, we're also talking about incapacity. Are they going to have the control they want? And most Americans out there don't. So I think it's important to have the conversations. And the reason we don't have the conversations is because people don't like to think about death and incapacity. But what I'm able to tell them is, hey, it's also about life planning. It's about, whether it's charitable giving in life, whether it's setting these things up, whether it's instilling values that you haven't really been able to have those conversations about. This is a great avenue to do this. Because what I've found is pretty universal with all families. All kids are interested in hearing about what they're going to get. So you will have their attention if you start talking about this. But we're happy to facilitate those conversations for sure.
Definitely a captive audience when that's the discussion topic. Terry, what about you? How often do you like to meet with clients, and what kind of work can they be doing in between visits?
Great question. Our team in particular, we have a proactive service model. So we aim to review financial plans, yearly with our clients. But of course, we have touch points throughout the year to talk with them about various things. And it just depends on, again, what's going on in their lives to make that touch point unique and personalized, but also what could be going on in the markets. And for example, Ray, I'm sure will jump in here too. This has been a challenging year, as everyone knows. And so when that happens, a lot of times you look to very specific things like tax loss harvesting as an opportunity. And so it's a good way to collaborate with a CPA to say, hey, what do things look like on the tax side? And would that be something beneficial to do, to take a look at some of your taxable accounts and see what we can do there. So generally speaking, at least once a year for financial planning updates. And by the way, Tripp, we've been telling our clients, every 5 to 10 years, revisit with your estate planning attorney, and we keep notes on that. So we'll revisit and maybe move up that time frame to 3 years. Thank you for that idea. And then otherwise it's ad hoc based on situational events that arise throughout.
And Ray, obviously your scenario is a little different in preparing taxes, but how often do you like to meet with them or have kind of these more substantial conversations to see what the full picture is going to look like?
Well, I see a lot of my clients annually anyway, and then if there's something we need to discuss in depth or follow up on, we'll arrange appointments, outside of the tax season. And of course, they're always free to contact me if something comes up where they have a concern or whatnot. And again, it gets back to relationship.
Absolutely.
Your clients trust you, and you do a good job for them, they'll keep you in the loop.
Well, and as Terry said, it's relationship with your other co-advisors and making sure that you're having those great discussions and sharing, like we said, those nuggets that you may be hearing or ideas that are strategies that might be beneficial to your mutual clients. Kind of shifting gears here, what are the biggest concerns you're hearing from each of your clients right now? And I'll start with you, Ray. What's the biggest concern you're hearing or question?
What happened to my retirement plan? my 201k. Yeah, it's that's a concern. Just the environment in general, just the fact that there's a chance tax laws are going to change in another couple of years. We're good until about 2025 right now, assuming that Congress doesn't decide to do anything in the meantime. So we're just in generally a volatile environment right now, and that causes people heartburn, and that's certainly understandable.
What about you, Terry? What questions and concerns are you hearing the most from your clients?
To build on what Ray just mentioned, it's market volatility and inflation, and obviously like high inflation, and that has driven part of the market volatility. So it's talking through that, it's going through statistics, looking at information about what has happened over time to, understand that, yes, these things do happen. It's never fun when it does happen. It's just a different version of the same movie, but it's talking through it and explaining that we're there in tough times and great times. And, not going to hide and avoid the topic. We're going to face it head on. And again, it comes back to tracking to their financial plan. That's really the key.
Yep. What about you, Tripp? What are you hearing?
Yeah, I would say in the last year and a half or so, it's been the uncertainty about taxes and the confusion about what the law actually is or what it's going to be. Understanding that although it seems like a lot has changed, it hasn't, but it could. Especially with the estate tax, it's been all over the map. So that kind of creates anxiety amongst clients. Most of my clients have paid, taxes 4 times on the same dollar. They don't want to pay a fifth, and they really just want something that's certain. We can't give them that, but we can help them plan. And so just having that conversation, making sure they understand the lay of the land and kind of making sure they feel good about the planning that they've done. And if they don't, then giving them some options.
Ray, I'm going to ask you a very specific question about the change in rules for IRA assets through the SECURE Act. Can you share how clients kind of responded to the elimination of the stretch provisions when children were beneficiaries, or if you're seeing any interesting strategies to stretch that income distribution past 10 years or involve philanthropic support within that?
Well, I think that it's safe to say that most of my clients are interested in about me, as opposed to seeing how much they can leave, especially in the last year or two. there hasn't been a whole lot of emphasis on, how can we get this down to the children with regards to our assets. The most, I would say right now, they've been content just to leave things where they are, where children is named as the beneficiary and, let them deal with it. We have had some instances where, I've suggested maybe looking at a CRT if charitable remainder trust, if, that's really part of your goal. Looking at maybe converting some assets to a Roth IRA. But I haven't had too many of those conversations lately.
Yeah. Now, again, I've mentioned this many times. These conversations are just so refreshing because we're all saying the same thing. We're all saying it's important to have regular conversations. It's important to share values. It's important to have conversations with the next generation. How do each of you prefer to work with colleague advisors, including community foundation staff? How do you view kind of benefits of that team approach? And Terry, I'll start with you on that.
Sure. And I guess I'll throw it out there. This is important to say. We're in a highly, regulated industry. So a lot of times we have to be very careful about how we go about establishing those relationships. But again, it always starts with the client and understanding their objectives and then talking to them about these various opportunities and how we can take a look at their bigger picture and what they would like to do in terms of bringing in the various specialties. And then, oftentimes they may already have an estate planning attorney and or a CPA. Sometimes they don't, but it's asking them, we'd love to sit down and collaborate with your, the broader team. Would you like to do that? And oftentimes they say, yeah, that would be great. The philanthropic side, normally that's not let's sit down at the same table with the estate planning attorney and the CPA at the same time. That's sort of that next meeting. And again, if the client's open to it, then we love to meet with their team. And if they don't have a team, we love to say, would you like for us to think about some different folks, for you to be educated about, who's out there and what may be an opportunity for you. And then we let the client lead from there.
And Terry, I'll ask a quick follow-up. What do you see as a kind of surprising benefit of really getting all around the table with the additional advisors? What's surprising about that experience?
More proactive planning as opposed to reactive planning. And that's, a simple way of saying it. But there's things that fall in the middle when you say, let's connect the dots. It's something that a CPA or estate planning attorney would know that we wouldn't know enough about to even ask the question. So that's when they can come forward and then we can use that information to incorporate in a proactive plan.
What do you prefer about kind of that team approach, and what are some surprising takeaways when you've been able to be all around the same table with colleague advisors?
Well, I'm not the one that does the heavy lifting like Terry and Tripp do. I'm more of an instigator. But I think it's important that we all get together at some point, whether in person or telephone, whatever, excuse me, to make sure that, all information is available, that, I know what they're doing, so that, I can help my client. A lot of times they'll come back from an advisor and say, now, what is all this about? And I wasn't in the meeting, so I've got maybe bits and pieces, or, generally I can answer, what they're trying to do, but it's just good to have that intra-communication, I think.
Absolutely. And that shared language, making sure you hear it from the horse's mouth, not a few steps removed, is always beneficial. What about you, Tripp? What do you enjoy about kind of a colleague team approach and working with clients, and what's been a surprising takeaway?
Well, the way we practice, we want our plans to work. So because we do a lot of trust planning, we want the assets to be aligned or funded to the trust. So it's imperative that we have a financial advisor helping make sure the assets are where they need to be and having those conversations with the client. So we work very closely with financial advisors to ensure that happens, whether it's somebody we work with a lot or someone's moved here from, wherever and they have an advisor there. We've got to get on the phone with them and talk to them about the plan. To Ray's point, sometimes there's not a lot of tax implications when it comes to, your simple revocable living trust. But when you get into more complex planning, then you have to have the whole team. And there are going to be things that are going to show up that Ray is going to have to deal with the return or whatever that he needs to know about before it happens. So making sure they get copies of the plan, just making sure there's that communication. And I think when everybody has the client's interest at heart, it's enjoyable and takes some of the load off. So that there's that exponential factor where everybody's pushing the same way. The client's going to be served best, and left hand's talking to the right hand. There's just much better chance it's going to work well.
Absolutely. I'll share a quick story before my next question, in that we had been working with an estate planner for a number of years who referred a client to us in the last 12, 16 months. And for the first time, he actually sat in on the donor meeting with us when they signed the agreement and started talking about the values. And it was the first time in all the years that he had been working with us and referring clients with us to us to sit down and hear what that conversation's like. And I think it's been really enlightening for him to hear, what's that next step? What are the conversations that this other team member is having with this client, and how can that really benefit my practice or my sphere in my work with them? So I would just encourage everyone, when possible, to include other individuals, because as we've all said, it just provides such a bigger picture, and many hands make light work. It's, as you said, Trip, if everybody's talking the same language, we're able to push things along a little easier.
I would also point out with your organization, one of the reasons I like working with y'all, there are a lot of charitable organizations that aren't proactive and don't really have a way to set up or coordinate with the estate planning. And when I'm able to tell my client, hey, you don't have to come in here and redo your trust just to make this small change. You've got it set up with them. We can talk about it. We can make sure it happens, but it makes it so much more efficient for them. And they honestly feel like they have a lot more control that way. So y'all do a great job of that.
Well, we appreciate that. And I was looking back at my notes. One of your points earlier was love, money, and control. And donors do love to have, or clients do love to have control. So we appreciate giving them a little bit of that. Here's kind of a more philosophical question. What's the greatest lesson you've learned in your career about working with multi-generational families? And what advice would you give these new families when they first meet with you? Trip, we'll start with you.
Yeah, that's a tough one because a lot of it goes into the the family values, the family legacy, the structure of how children were raised. Were the parents intentional about talking to them about these things? I guess the best way I can do is just to tell you my own story. Is I have very young children. As a Christian, what I give to is things that support God's kingdom. Whether or not my kids will be on that same page, that's my hope. But a lot of that's going to be having to do with how much I talk to them and show them that. And unfortunately, sometimes that doesn't happen. So you can have very charitable parents, but for whatever reason, the kids don't catch that same spirit. So I think if it's going to work, there has to be some intentionality about it, and there has to be these conversations. There has to be that planning. And what I found is it's involved sooner rather than later. Then the older they get, the more likely they're going to not only be involved in that legacy giving, but also reap the benefits of it and see the rewards of it and see people helped. And that's just been my experience.
Thanks for that. Ray, what about you? What's the greatest lesson you've learned in your career about working with multi-generational families?
Just understanding who the players are, what their motivations are, what their goals are, what their expectations are, and making sure that there is clear communications up and down the line.
Absolutely. Terry, what's your greatest lesson you've learned in working with multi-generational families?
Sure, and I'll just share a personal anecdote because it's what drives me every day and why I'm committed to this career. I've personally witnessed a family that was very successful in creating a family-run, closely held business, and they were very generous with their children, but they, for whatever reason, did not have conversations like we've been talking about, those critical conversations, or Trip, you said those intentional types of conversations. And it completely derailed that G2, the second generation, for all 5 kids. It was either they became spendthrift types of children and or lackluster, what am I trying to say? A lackluster work ethic, and it really eroded the wealth that had been created at that first level, and created a situation for that second generation where they could have been really responsible corporate citizens, or just great stewards and gone on to have an amazing life and potentially career in various areas where they could have made a difference because they're well educated and wonderful, in terms of their skill sets. That has been incredibly sad to see. And so every day that drives me to help others and know that I want to get way ahead of that for other families.
Yeah, kind of as a follow-up to that, what makes your kind of overtly philanthropic clients different from others? And I'll let you start with that, Terry.
That's an interesting question, because I think it really does go back to their initial value set, probably when they were raised and how they were brought up, and the imparting of those initial family values as to how people view giving and what that value set means. So I can't tell exactly where it comes from, but it's just that benevolence that people have innately. That's really where it starts. It's less about this is what we should do, or this is what the financial impact is. It's more about where it comes from, a true place in their heart.
Trip, what about you? Do you see any difference in kind of your overtly philanthropic clients and how they work with you or how they structure things?
Yeah, usually it is a decision they made long ago, either when they started their business or inherited or however they got it. And they're very decisive, and they've seen the rewards of doing it. It hasn't hurt them in their business. I think it's actually helped them. I've been blessed by it. And they're pretty determined to make a difference and to be good stewards of what they have. And I would also say, if someone is wanting to do charitable planning just for the tax purposes, they usually don't end up following through with it. It usually kind of falls apart. There's got to be that charitable intent somewhere driving it.
That's a perfect segue to Ray here. There are tax advantages to being philanthropic, but do you see any specific differences with your kind of overtly or intentionally philanthropic clients than others?
I don't know that I've ever had a client have charitable intentions exclusively for tax purposes. It's something they want to do, and the fact that there's a tax benefit is icing on the cake. I think they're driven by, they've been successful in business and they want to give back in some fashion. And I can get a tax break for this too. So it's I think it comes from within. You either are charitably inclined or you're not. So.
Absolutely. I've got kind of 2 last questions, and then we'll open it up to Q&A here. And this is going to be an easy one, but I love to hear the resounding answer. On average, what percentage of your clients are interested in learning about philanthropy as a planning tool or involving philanthropy in their plans? I'll start with you, Trip.
Well, I don't have an exact number, but I will say it's been probably one of my greater surprises since I've been in practice is how, and it's not that people aren't giving it life. And a lot of times that's what it is. People are giving more in life than in death, but it has been lower than I would have imagined when I first started. I find that if we talk about it, if I bring it up, they're more likely, it's almost to realize, well, yeah, I want to do that. And you also have to be very careful about not, if someone wants to give, making sure it's not a disaster situation where they actually give that's never going to happen. It's if you want to give, well, let's find a way to make sure that happens. But yeah, I'd say it's been lower than I would think. It's definitely not a majority of clients.
What about you, Terry?
Yeah, I took a look and I did a quick calculation before this session, and I would say about half. And it's not necessarily because they sit down and say, oh, as a part of my financial plan, I want to definitely give X amount during my lifetime or X amount beyond my lifetime, or what we politely call end of plan. It's more so when we finish the financial plan and they kind of see, we plan for folks to live until their young 90s, for example, and they see kind of what's left, they usually comment about it. And every once in a while, you'll have a comment around, I want that last check that I write to bounce. So I don't need to see that amount at the end of plan. But that's how I'm coming up with my statistic. Most people say, oh, wow, well, then I'd like to start to think about how I can allocate money now and beyond. And we create some what if scenarios around that type of giving.
You, Ray, kind of what percentage of your clients are interested in being philanthropic or using that as a tool?
Well, the answer is not as simple as the question. It's and I don't know if I had to guess, I'd say probably maybe around 20% would probably initiate that conversation with me. Others, when we have it in the course of a discussion, I might suggest it, and then there's perhaps an interest.
Absolutely. I think that we've all heard that it's those initial conversations that really set the groundwork or interest in learning more about putting philanthropy as a part of their planning that makes a huge difference. My last question before Q&A is, tell us about your most memorable philanthropic gift that you facilitated. And I'll start with you, Ray.
A number of years ago, I had a business client and had a right good year, and we had done about everything we could to minimize taxes. And I suggested, well, what about a charitable contribution? And the client said, well, yeah, we could do that, but who do we give it to? And this was before I was associated with the Coastal Community Foundation, but I'd always been a fan of it. And I said, well, it might be a way that you could give go ahead and give the gift and then more or less decide later, how we could help people with it. Long story short, I got a check for $250,000. So that was, I figured we'd get about maybe 50. So that certainly was a surprise, very pleasant.
Absolutely. Terry, what about you? What's been a memorable, for good or for bad or for interesting philanthropic gift you have facilitated?
Yeah, I would feel more comfortable just sharing a personal anecdote again. So I'm shying away from any client-specific types of scenarios. This is many years ago, but I gave money to a theater up in the New Hampshire region. It was my uncle, through a marriage, my uncle, who had started and founded this theater a long time ago, but it needed to be renovated in order to keep it vibrant and thriving for this local community. And it was such a hub of cultural inspiration for this tiny town that I decided to give. And after the renovations were complete, to go up there and just see the attraction and the level of commitment and the interest and just the continual building of that local community and how important theater is to that region. It has made a lasting impact for still is on the forefront of my mind. It's made a lasting impact to me. So I can only imagine everyone's situation is different, but I can only imagine when any of our respective clients or people that we know, when they do give, just to have that feeling of what you've done to make a difference, whether it's in education or your local community, you're truly making a difference for not just our lifetime, for others, obviously, but for posterity.
Thanks, Terry. What I love about that too is that there's a physical place that you could share with your family, and where it's all about conversations and how to instill those values. You can take family to that location and really start that story. It's a nice beacon within your own family history. What about you, Trip? What's a memorable philanthropic gift?
I can think of a couple of occasions where people fall into the mold of they think they have to give assets to a family member who either doesn't need them or probably doesn't deserve them. And they are begrudgingly doing their planning because they don't think there are any other options. And when you suggest maybe some of it goes to a charity, and then they their eyes light up and realize, well, yeah, I am interested in that cause. And yeah, it almost changes their whole attitude about planning. So I can think of a couple of particularly some children's charities where people got really excited about their planning where before they didn't even want to do it.
Well, now we're going to open up for a quick Q&A, and I've got one that's submitted that is a little detailed. So listen to the full prompt before you answer, but it's absolutely what we've been talking about. There was a U.S. Trust study of the philanthropic conversation back in 2012 that said professional advisors and high net worth clients they serve are in disagreement about the frequency of discussions and who initiates them. It says, contrary to the fact that 89% of advisors say they discuss philanthropy with at least some of their clients, only 55% of these individuals say they actually discuss them with an advisor. And then there's an additional, 10 or 15% open to these discussions. Why do you think there's a disconnect between the desire to have these conversations and actually having them? And I'll open that to anybody who wants to answer.
I'll just say real quick, there can sometimes be you don't want to embarrass someone when they said, hey, I'm giving it all here. And then you say, well, do you want to also, give it to a charitable cause? So there's a little bit of that sometimes. So I think for me, it makes more sense to ask, who do you want to give to? And then to suggest all the possibilities. Because if you try to do it after the fact, sometimes it can be kind of an awkward conversation. So I suspect that might be one of the reasons.
A little more difficult to wind it back.
I can jump in quickly. I think I would say that a lot of times the primary focus, at least the clients that we're working with, the primary focus is when they think about giving, they immediately go to their own family. And it's not so much that they're not concerned or mindful of these other outside areas where they could give. It's just that's what they've been doing all their life, either caring for kids, and they'll oftentimes say, well, wait a minute, we've done all this, great stuff to give our kids an early foundation and maybe help them get through school. So now we want to do this, next thing, help them with a house or help them with the startup company they want to, or those kinds of things. So I think it's kind of shifting the mindset, going with their objectives, but also maybe asking other questions too, to say, okay, and then do you have, or would you like to consider now or later as a part of your plan, gifting beyond or outside of the family, and explore a little bit of that too. I think that onus is probably on maybe all of us to ask that question.
I've got one last question before we wrap up. What question or idea about charitable giving do you find resonates the most with your clients? What's the most kind of inspiring question that you ask your clients? And I'll start with you, Ray.
That's really kind of difficult to answer because I generally kind of let the client take the lead, and, maybe there are some soft suggestions trying to go down that path. Some clients are pretty much have their mind made up. So it can be a delicate situation. I would certainly like to broach that idea, but I'm not going to press it. So I guess the short answer is it's more client driven, with maybe some gentle persuasion thrown in.
Nice balancing act. Yeah. What about you, Trip?
Well, kind of going back to the relationship thing, I think of meeting with clients. I'm a sports fan, so I think of the way games are announced. You have the play-by-play guy and you have the color guy. And I think if we focus too much on the play-by-play and the technical, we miss out on, as to Ray's point, what they are interested in, what they want to do. So if we spend enough time up front in each meeting, kind of getting to know them better and reconnecting with them, those things are going to come out, and you're going to be able to have a good idea of what they're passionate about and where they want to give, and then you can kind of encourage that.
Great questions. I like that. Play-by-play versus color commentary. Terry, what about you? What questions or ideas resonate the most?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I have anything additional to add beyond what Ray and Tripp suggested, other than, at the onset, asking those kinds of questions, and then maybe periodically as we do their review to trickle in or weave in some of those questions. Again, Ray, to your point, not to push the issue, but just to, bring it to their forefront, to at least get them to think about it from time to time, I think is a good idea. And we do that, but we can always do a better job of that.
Well, we are exactly at the hour, and I just want to say thank you so much to each of you for serving as panelists and for having this great discussion. Just like you said, Terry, we should be having these conversations more often. It's so refreshing and rewarding, and really benefits the community when we have these discussions, when people are able to give back in ways that are meaningful to them and reflect the legacy that they want to leave. So again, thank you all for joining us. We've got one more session that will start here in just a minute about trends in family philanthropy. So I'm going to put us on a brief pause, and then we'll jump back into session 2. So stay tuned. Thanks, everybody.